In 1988, Paul Germain was an associate producer on The Tracy Ullman Show. 3 years later, he was the creator and showrunner of one of the most successful children's animated television shows of all time. 3 years after that, he had a hard time finding work. Paul Germain, creator, Rugrats.
After Rugrats, I left the company not on great terms. Gabor and Arlene made a concerted effort to pretend like I didn't exist, and Nickelodeon went along with it, and so there would be stories in the LA Times which talked about how they were the mother and father of Rugrats and never mentioned me. So I was having a tough time getting work after that. It was very ugly. It was mostly like, I remember I had a meeting at CBS and my agent, I finally had an agent at this point, and she said, I've got one of the creators of Rugrats. And the executive replied to her, that's not the way we heard it. You know, I was starting from zero, even though I'd created this giant and ran this giant hit. And I had 3 Emmys sitting on my bookshelf at home. Anyway, I was trying to rebuild my career. And my agent called and said, look, I've got a pitch for you at Universal. They're doing a project based on the Beethoven movie with the dog. And I go, oh God, that's not what I want to do with my career. And she said, look, this is important. I've guided you. You've listened to me so far. Hear me now. You need this. Go over there and take the meeting and see what you can do. Okay. They want to make an animated TV show based on the Beethoven movies. So I watched the movie and I go, okay, it's all right. The executives at CBS who have bought the show on the basis of the movie don't like the development for the TV show, and they want to scratch it and start over again. Basically what it was is, you remember those dogs playing poker? It was like that. It was a bunch of dogs in like fedoras and chomping cigars, and there's like hoodlums and stuff like that. I go, what the hell is this, right? It has nothing to do with the movie. So I just looked at this and said, this is ridiculous. But it had been rejected anyway, so it was dead. So I get this meeting. They have me come into Universal, and I meet with their animation division, right? And I sit down, and they say, we have to come up with something new. Do you have any ideas? All we have to do is we have to capture the spirit of the movies in a TV format. What would you do? I looked at them and I said, look, I've only had a day to think about this. The best I can tell you is if I were doing it, I would start by saying the movie is about a real dog and his human masters. And there's a plot, but the dog's just a dog. He's just a big slobbery dog, and the dad doesn't get along with him, and he drips slobber over everything, and haha, isn't that funny? That's the movie, right? It's like the dog loves the man doesn't like the dog, and by the end of the movie, he grudgingly has some affection for him, right? So I said, if I were doing it, I wouldn't say there's this underground city of dogs. That doesn't interest me. It's just boring. I would say it's animated, so they're going to talk. But otherwise, they're dogs. They do dog stuff. Maybe it's our imagination of if a dog could talk, what would he say? But they're dogs. That's it. They're talking dogs, but otherwise they're dogs. Now, if you think about it, that's not that different from Rugrats, right? If a baby could talk, this is what he'd say. This is all I said, right? That's it. That was the whole pitch. They looked at me and they said, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And they said, can you stay longer? And I said, yeah. And they said, can we take you over to meet with the Reitman people? So I said, okay. So it was hilarious. Have you been to the Universal lot? Do you know the lot? It's a big, wide lot, right? So we got in somebody's car in the parking lot and drove across the lot to the other side, which I thought was the funniest thing in the world. Why couldn't we just walk? But anyway, we drove over in someone's Cadillac to the other side of the lot and went into the Reitman people. And I said it again, just what I'd said before. That's it. That was my pitch. They loved it. So the next thing I knew, I said, I want to bring my partner, Joanne Soliberry, on this project. Because by then, Joe and I were kind of decided we wanted to be partners, though we'd never done anything together. So Joe came in as a writer. I was the producer. Joe came in as a writer because nobody knew him, but I was the guy who produced Rugrats. So Joe came in as a writer on the project.
Beethoven was a transitional thing in my relationship with Paul. I don't know if he told you this. Did he tell you this whole story? So what happened with Beethoven was, so now I go off and I'm working with Craig. The whole thing happens with Arnold. And we're doing other things too. Craig and we're doing other things. And we wrote a pilot and it was being tested and all this stuff. It's kind of taking its time. And I'm kind of low on money and I don't know what to do. Well, in the middle of all this, Paul, he calls me one day and he goes, guess what? I've got a job. You want a job? I got a job for it. And I said, what's the job? And he said, well, these guys at the Reitman Company, they are trying to make a show out of Beethoven. I said, the dog? The dog, And he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, a talking dog show. I don't really want to do that. And he said, well, it's a job. I said, okay. So Paul said, I have to go back in and pitch. Would you come with me and pitch with me? So I said, all right.
So Joe came in as a writer on the project. He helped me formulate, plan out what the show would be. We talked about it together. We worked out a plan. And Joe pitched it. He's an amazing pitcher.
We go off and we work on it for a few days and we come up with some funny things. And honestly, I thought I came up with some pretty funny stuff. So Paul doesn't like to pitch very much. So I go in and I pitch it. But all these Reitman guys, they were like, it was like going to pitch to the mafia or something. They're old guys. They're like, yeah, what do you got for me? And it's like 4 guys. And they actually turned out to be really nice, but they scared us a little bit. I remember we pitched something like, here's how we're seeing the show. George is this guy, he's got this dog, and then you see the dog do something, he destroys the house. I remember he destroys the house, and we go through this big, long rigmarole, and he destroys the house, and he rips this, and the guy's chasing it, and things are falling down, and this happens, and he finally gets, you damn dog, I hate you so much, and he throws the dog outside and locks it to the thing, and he goes inside, and the dog looks to this other little dog that's sitting there, he goes, he loves me, or something like that.
You filthy dog! I'm sick of this! Every time I turn my back, you're messing up something new. You've destroyed my house, you've ruined my life, you're making me crazy! Now stay here, Beethoven. I mean it. Stay here! Hey, Beethoven, how's it going? Pretty good. I think he's starting to like me.
Was not a great pitch, but that was it. And when we said he loves me or something, they just burst out laughing. And they said, that's it. That's the show. And we were like, great.
And suddenly, Universal's problem was solved. But the show had to go on the air in September, and it was March. Now, I don't know if you know what that means. That's just insane. It's March. We don't have any characters. We threw away everything that existed from this other idea that I told you about. It was gone. It was out the window. Not by my choice, although I agreed with it, by CBS's choice. So we had to come up with new artwork. We had to write the scripts. We had to write the Bible. We had to hire the actors. We had to do everything. And it was March, and we had to get it on the air in September. That's just insane. We did it. But a lot had to be sacrificed along the way to make it work. And the main thing that got sacrificed was animation. So it didn't look very good. The animation wasn't great. The designs were not my taste. But there's nothing I could do about that. It was a speeding freight train, and I just had to get it not to go off the track, and that was it. And so that was the show. We did a year's worth of episodes. It did really well for CBS. They were going to pick up a second season, but there got to be a political dispute between the woman running CBS at the time and the guy at Universal who was in charge of the animation division. They got into a fight over something, and to punish him, the executive at CBS canceled the show, which was fine. It wasn't a great show. It wasn't a tremendous loss. It was fine.
Now, at this point, he's being represented by this woman, Ellen Goldsmith Vane, who is Gotham. And Ellen gets this great deal for Paul, like good money. And I'm brought in as like a story editor on it for like half the money. And I'm thinking, this is a bad situation. This is like a repeated, Paul's career is doing great, mine's not doing so great. So my feelings were hurt. Poor Paul. I'm sorry I'm saying telling you these stories with Paul, but you're asking. So, but I made it clear to Paul that I didn't think this was very fair. And Paul kind of said, it's not. It was kind of a big moment for us because it was like, Paul knew he'd kind of like, not screwed me over, but he was positioned in a different place, And he did take the meeting first and everything, but I just felt like it wasn't fair. And I was having, like I said, I was having issues of respect. So in the middle of all this, Arnold happened. I got a call from Craig or something at some point saying, they're going to make it. We're going to make the show. And I thought, great. This is my way of getting out and actually like proving that I'm something besides Paul's shadow, basically. But I also thought this is going to be a nightmare because Steve and Craig and I have slightly different, I already knew, we have slightly different ideas of what a good kid show is supposed to be. And it's just enough where it's going to cause problems. I thought the executives are going to be hard. There's going to be a hard show. And I know it's not going to be pleasant. And I actually loved working with Paul. I love Paul. He's like my brother. So at one point, I got on the phone with Ellen about something. And she was like, you can't do this, you're hurting Paul or whatever. And I just screamed at her. And that was a big change in our relationship. She kind of like went, oh, he's equals with Paul. I didn't realize that, but you kind of like, it's one of those things, sometimes you just have to scream at people and it's not fun, and it's like it puts your heart in a bad place, I was a bit of a screamer. Yeah, I'd screamed at people. But, I kind of, in my family, Paul and I both have the same thing. We're very loud. We're both the oldest of all boys. So there were 5 boys in my family and 4 boys in his family. And yelling and screaming and hitting is kind of how you say stuff to each other, I don't take it quite as badly when someone, yells. It kind of makes me listen to them. But, I've noticed that sometimes it makes other people, turns them off, But I also noticed that in this town, it feels like unless you're willing to do that every once in a while, people just think you're a pushover, and that they can continue to take advantage of you. I feel like maybe a good lesson for you, for all of us.
I was kind of proud of him. She deserved it. Look, this was another learning experience, right? Joe and I had talked about being partners, but we hadn't officially defined ourselves that way. And I got a job offer based on the fact that I was the guy who'd done Rugrats. They hired me as a producer, and then they brought Joe in as a writer. Even though I'd brought him in and we were kind of working as a team, they didn't see us that way. And I was offered basically a much larger amount of money than he was and a much better title than he had. And he thought, why isn't Paul going to them and saying, no, just give me a little less, give him a little more. Let's make it equal and fair. I regret it because I should have. Again, it was a period of learning for me, and I really made a mistake. And Joe was really angry and hurt about it. And the result of it was that he walked away. He said, I need to prove to everyone, including our mutual agent, I need to prove who I am and how I can do things on my own, and I'm not just a satellite of Paul. I never thought of him as my satellite. But on the other hand, I didn't fight for him not to be.
Joe's yelling and screaming at his agent and leaving Beethoven also emboldened him when it came to Arnold.
It also put me in this place where I could say to Craig, I'm not doing it and if you give me a crappy credit. I want to be a producer on the show. I want you to admit that we developed the show with you forever, that it always has to say developed by the 3 of us, because you had this idea, but you didn't do this. If Sam Simon developed The Simpsons, then we developed your show for you. And he agreed to it. So by doing that, it meant that from now on, Paul and I, if I partnered with Paul, we could be partnered as equals, if that makes any sense.
Steve and I became good friends right away too, but Joe especially, man, I felt like I'd found like a blood brother. Because he just he loves all the same movies, and he loves architecture. And we would immediately go drive around LA looking for old, classic mid-century modern LA buildings, and go to places like the Derby. You know what I mean? He loves that stuff. You go to the Derby, he's like, look, see that little window? You should be able to you could look through this window and see the room where, Chaplin and Hemingway and Well, that's Joe. He's one of my favorite people. Joe in Solid Hair is just truly one of the great people.
Craig had worked with me and Steve back when we were partners still on Rugrats. So when he did Hey Arnold, he said, I want you guys to do it together,
So Steve and I went over to Craig's house for nights and nights and nights, weeks and weeks and weeks, basically smoking different things and stuff and drinking and talking. And we came up with what is Hey Arnold, essentially.
Well, Hey Arnold was his baby. I don't want to ever give the impression that Steve and I created Hey Arnold for him, because that's not what happened. What happened was he had a creation and he just wanted to make it into a TV show, and he loved how Steve and I wrote and how we thought about things. And that's kind of what happened. And Steve and I brought everything we had to it. We tried to make it personal to ourselves, but we always knew it was Craig's. It was always going to be Craig's.
Which was based on Craig's. If you've seen those the little things, if you've seen them, they're silent. They're all inside Arnold's mind. He never speaks. No one speaks, And they're all what's in your imagination is kind of what's going on, they're great. I love those things. But we were well, that's not going to work for a 30-minute cartoon. We have to actually think of characters and what's the town. So it just kind of all got invented on these nights, you know? And the one that I always remember, I think I might have mentioned this to you before too, I told this story a lot because I just remember it so well, is that Steve, I knew he really loved the character of Angelica. And he always wrote these screenplays that were great screenplays about these messed up relationships, you know, men and women's messed up relationships. Very funny, but they were really dark. And in the comic strip that Craig had started to do, the character of Helga, who was a character who was in the little 1-minute animation things, or those few-minute animation things he did, but she was just a girl in the background. But he had done a comic strip where she was kind of like a catcher or something, a baseball diamond. And Steve really liked Angelica, and he said, I kind of wish this girl, like, what if she's like hates him? So we were doing lots of jokes about, oh, you know, stories, or what if this Helga girl hates Arnold, Helga hates Arnold. And I kept saying, why does she hate him? You know, why does she hate him? I just don't, I get it, guys, I understand, I get, you know, Angelica's a bully, I get you want to do another bully, but why does she hate him, I kept saying. And Craig's wife, Lisa, goes walking through the room at that moment, and she said, maybe she hates him because she's really in love with him. And I just remember looking at Steve, and Steve looking at me and going, oh my God, that's great. And then it was the Steve riff, you know, Steve and Craig and me were all going, yeah, you know, she has a, you know, what if she's got a shrine to him, but she'll never tell him, and, you know, it was just like, which I think is kind of the key to Arnold, honestly, is that relationship, you know?
The first Arnold episodes were being seen. I think they were being shown around. I don't think it had aired yet. And he showed it to Matt Groening. And because Matt used to be his brother-in-law. And Matt said, you know what I like about this show? That you can be sad, that you don't have to be funny. And I think Craig went, cool, I'm not going to worry about that. And he just kind of went, not funny.
The formula for writing an Arnold episode that we decided early on was, if you look at them, Pigeon Man's a good example, Eugene's bike is a good example. Arnold accidentally causes harm to someone else. Like, he didn't mean for Eugene's bike to get destroyed, or then for Eugene to fall down in the sewer hole or whatever and have to go to be in a hospital. But it still happened because of Arnold. And so those are perfect because Arnold feels really bad and he has to think, and you kind of have a melancholy middle of the story where Arnold's trying to figure out what to do. And then he does something and, like he takes Pigeon Man out for pizza, re-socializes Pigeon Man a tiny bit to go have some pizza. And you can see Pigeon Man's like, oh, it's great. And he tries to give Eugene a perfect day, but everything goes wrong for Eugene too. So, the fun of those Arnold stories is he's really a good guy. He's trying to make things better. He's very empathetic of other people's situations and is trying to make things better. But what we say is, in this universe, nothing ever turns out right. You might have a moment of glory, and then things are going to, by the end of the episode, go back to the status quo, and you're kind of suffering again. And that was what we said. It was just that we thought that was we all agreed, Joe and Steve and I all agreed that was what childhood was kind of like. You do your best. It's really cool to make a main character be kind of a hero in the sense that he's really trying to, he's trying to help this situation, but he kind of can't. He's just a little kid, and he can't really save the day. And so at the end of the story, they're kind of like, oh, okay, well, thanks for trying. and Pigeon Man tells Arnold, he's like, no, you've shown me that there are people that you can trust, but look, I gotta hit it. I gotta go. And so that's nice. It's like Arnold touched everybody, and he kind of reaches out and kind of makes things a little bit better. And the fun of that storytelling is that it's very poignant. Things aren't truly better. The world is still pretty grim. That's why we like to tell those stories. It's fun. They have a certain depth to them because for a kid show, it dared to say, wow, life's pretty disappointing.
What happened, I was only there for about the first 20, and I thought, this isn't really my experience of childhood. That was what my problem was. Not that I thought it wouldn't be good to do, a show like this, but it's kind of like they were telling us that the character was in 4th grade, and he wasn't. He was really much more interested in sexual things. And that's fine if he's in 6th or 7th grade. That would have made sense. That's what I remember of childhood. So I wasn't feeling connected to it. I was feeling like this is becoming something else. I think a lot of this had to do with Steve and his point of view, and Steve was really wrestling it off into another direction.
Steve was fascinated by that dark side. You know, he probably shouldn't have been writing children's television. He didn't really like kids. He didn't have a very happy childhood. He does, you know, had no reason, but he was funny. It's just that he was a really troubled person. But the thing was, it was like three people. It was like three friends. It's like if you're playing a game when you're a little kid or something, and three guys. It's like somebody always feels like the odd man out. And I just kind of started feeling like I was the odd man out here. You know, it was like Craig and Steve kind of were, you know, taking the show in a place that I didn't really, you know, it wasn't really me. You know, it was more like what they wanted to do with the show. And I kept being the person who was asking the questions like that. I was like, why does, you know, okay, you want Helga to hate him, but why? I covered my wall with questions about who is Arnold, because I just didn't understand who he was. He wasn't a clear character to me. And I kept saying, is he this? Is he that?
I was always saying, like, who's Arnold? Who's Arnold? And at one point, and I actually stopped production for a while. I said, we need to figure this out. And Craig got kind of annoyed with me. And I would write all over, like it was like a madman from a, you know, serial killer movie where you've written notes all around your walls and, you know, arrows and stuff and pictures. And I was like, who is Arnold? And one day Craig came in to my office and he said, look, we really got to get moving again. I was like, I guess got to figure out who Arnold is, you know? And Craig said, all I can tell you is I remember this one time when I was a kid. I was asked by my teacher or something to recite the soliloquy from Hamlet. And so I memorized it. And I went into class that next day and I said, to be or not to be. Closed my eyes and I just said it. At the end of it, I opened my eyes and everyone just kind of laughed at me. And I thought, oh, how embarrassing. And I felt horrible. And I walked home. And as I was walking home quietly down the street, just thinking about like how I'd blown it, this car drove by and these tough kids leaned out and they said, hey, Hamlet, nice reading. And he said, in that moment, I thought, they're making fun of me. And at the same time, they're kind of complimenting me. And he said, and I think that's what Arnold's about. And I thought, okay. I don't know what that means exactly, except I know this. Craig is Arnold. That's what I thought. So that's what I kept telling myself after that, is like Craig is Arnold. Or at least Craig's how he sees Arnold, you know?
And so what was happening was we found ourselves writing more about other people.
You know, we had created this whole world of the boarding house with all these characters in it, and Nickelodeon kept killing them because they kept saying, "Oh, you're trying to make the show too adult," and we're like, "Yeah, we are."
When we started and we were first pitching the first episodes, we remember a terrible meeting where we went in and pitched like the first 10 ideas, and they liked like 2 to go forward. And we're like, "Whoa, 2 out of 10, we are fucked."
But Steve saw this. I think he really saw it as his baby, his show, and Steve wanted to make it much more adult. He wanted to make kind of sexual innuendo jokes. He had this one character who lived in the apartment building who got cut out eventually. But, well, I'll tell you that real quickly. He had this thing, and he really, really wanted to do it. This old lady or older lady who was an alcoholic. Steve loved the idea of alcoholics, which is sad considering that he drank himself to death. But this old lady was an alcoholic, and she asked Arnold to go buy things for her, and she was always inviting him in. It's like, sit down, Arnold. And she had like a slinky, outfit and everything. And there was always this thing is she trying to like seduce this kid? I mean, and that's what he wanted. Come on, Arnold, let me show you my drawings and stuff. And it was obviously sexual.
Oh, yeah, Lana Vale. Steve and I both thought that was a really funny joke to have Lana say, "How old are you, Arnold?" And he's like 9. And she goes, "Well, when will you be 10?" just so to make it kind of weird, and it was, what can I say? A character like that who's kind of hitting on Arnold seemed really funny to us just as we've sat around talking about it. But somehow when we tried to execute it, no way. You know what I mean? The network was like, what? She's hitting on him? That's no way. And trying to design her, we would try to make her kind of more sexy and they'd push back. And God, she ended up, I remember in the model, she's wearing kind of more like a little bit of a suit, almost like a business suit. And I'm like, oh my God, that must have been us trying not to freak out Nickelodeon and have her in her underwear. And so I just realized, nah, this ain't gonna fly. We can't be doing jokes about Arnold, considering having sex with a lady that lives in the boarding house.
And Nickelodeon was like, you can't do that. And they were always like fighting him. And the problem was, and again, I love Craig, but Craig wouldn't tell Steve not to do it, but he would also not tell Nickelodeon he was going to, he wouldn't defend Steve either. And so I felt like I was in the position to like defend Steve or tell Steve, change things. Look, why is this my job? I don't want to be the babysitter. And so I started feeling like I was the guy I was sort of the bad guy, and I didn't want to be that,
We just worked all that shit out. That's how it goes. They push back, and then I would be the diplomat and go back and sweet talk them and convince. That's what I did. And Steve wouldn't do any of that. Steve would be like, I'm not talking to him. You go talk to him. And so, it worked. It worked for Joe and Steve to be like, to put their foot down and be like, no, we're going to do it or we quit, and then I'd go and make it okay.
And I kept saying, Steve, you can't do this. It's like, why not? It's funny. Because that was always his argument. If it's funny, do it. So we were trying to think of things like, what could we do? What could we do? And Steve said, what if, instead of that woman, what if it's a husband and wife and it's Gabor and Arlene from, Klasky Csupo? What if it's them? And I was like, what do you mean? And Steve said, we do about a relationship. It's not really Gabor Arlene, but it's kind of like he's an immigrant, and he's got this wife and she's kind of more sensitive and she's always having her feelings hurt. And I was like, oh, that could be funny. My thing was, why would kids care about that? And then Steve started doing his Gabor impersonations, like he was Oscar Kokoschka, if you watch the show. And it's like, oh, Susie, why are you doing this to me? That kind of stuff.
Steve and Rachel shared an office for a while, and they were like, let's make two characters that are Gabor and Arlene, which is really funny because they aren't. Susie doesn't have anything to do with Arlene, and Oscar is such a loser, and Gabor, he was hugely successful. So it's not like, that's the character of Gabor, this sort of chiseling loser who spends all his time at the track and never worked a day in his life. Gabor actually gets a lot of shit done. So, but we loved the way we thought that relationship was funny. They're kind of bitchy relationship, and also Gabor's accent. And we found he had a lot of Hungarians working with him at the studio at Klasky Csupo. We noticed they all have a really funny way of talking. Their accent, it kind of falls off at the end of this. Susie, make me a sandwich. Like it kind of drops off at the end. And so, really, more than anything else, we're like, God, let's have a Czechoslovakian border who talks like Gabor. So that's where that came from. But it was really a group effort. Everybody contributed to that.
And I was like, but why do kids give a crap about this? Anyway, at one point, we were kind of debating it, talking about it, and I kept saying, but why? And Rachel came into my office at one point and she said, Joe, please let us do this. And I thought, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the person saying no. I'm not. That should be Craig's job, to say what direction I want the show to go. I should be working for him. Why am I doing this? And I just found myself getting more and more bitter about it. Like I didn't like my creative position there. Like I was the one they were like saying, if we can convince Joe it's okay, convince Craig or follow Craig's lead, So, and then my relationship with Steve kept getting worse and worse, and it was a bad time.
But Steve at that point was doing a thing where he wasn't, again, he just was kind of blowing it off, because he was like, he still considered himself above it, kind of, So he didn't help a lot. Like on the pilot, I was like, come on, Steve, help out. And he would just like show, like if Craig and I had a meeting sometimes, Steve would come at, if the meeting was at noon, Steve showed up at 4. And Craig's gone already, and he's like, "Oh man, sorry, I overslept." I mean, he just probably the alcohol was probably already involved. I didn't even know that. I don't know. But at this point, Steve and I had become really good friends again, and so he was coming over to the house all the time, and he knew my daughter and everything, and we were really close. But then once Arnold really happened, we would have these great moments of doing stuff together, and then Steve would just do these things that I thought, "Are you doing that purposely to fuck with me, to make me feel bad again?" He was doing a lot of that kind of stuff of, I'm a genius and you're my pencil carrier, Like Steve would come in sometimes, like he wouldn't come in. And so I couldn't count on him. And I was basically doing what I had done on Rugrats, which was just sort of just take over the writing room. But it just was a disrespectful kind of situation, I felt like. So I started really fighting with Steve. And so that's when it kind of really all went down. I can't say that there was a specific moment, But I just thought, I can't do this.
So once Joe came to work for me, it was sort of like he and Paul had split up, like he left his wife, you know. And Paul called him all the time. Hey man, when are we going to get our own show going? And so it was just an ongoing thing for the whole time that Joe was on Hey Arnold. Was Paul calling him every day and saying, you know, when are we going to get together and do our own thing? So he finally did. And I know he was really frustrated working for Nick on Hey Arnold, and he was happy to bail and go make his own show. And I think that's most of it, which is actually great for Joe, because when people aren't happy on a production, they kind of feel like they could do their own thing and it would be better. Then I always say to him, God, go on, man, go do your own thing and make something better than this. Let's see you do it. And so it was really cool for Joe actually to become the creator of his own show. You know, I mean, there was a lot of arguing and fighting and shit, but I didn't care about that. I was happy to see Joe get his own show. In Joe's case, it was tough because he's a good friend. I didn't want to let him go, especially because it was like, oh, I'm going to miss having Joe around. But yeah, I mean, he had to go do that. So yeah, I got out of his way.
And I was leaving the show. And they didn't really believe I was really going to leave, because everyone they knew that were working on something special, but I just couldn't take it anymore. And I knew we were working on something special too. I still read those old scripts and just think, God, I can't believe we were able to get those things passed. So I was done with the show.
I never thought of him as my satellite. But on the other hand, I didn't fight for him not to be. This was a big lesson for me. Once we had that experience, and then he went to work on Arnold, which I didn't do. And then once we reformed, we still remained really close friends, and he forgave me. And I think he saw honestly that I had made a mistake that I regretted. I really did regret it. And since then, we have only worked as partners. We tell everybody we're equals. Same pay, same contract, same responsibility, same everything. We're partners and we do everything together.
I kind of had to do Hey Arnold in order to come back to be with Paul as an equal.
Right after that show ended, and then 6 months later or so, we got the gig at Disney, and the rest is history.